series on wisdom texts. And so our text today is from Proverbs chapter 3, and I'm going to read 1 through 8. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and abundant wealth will they give you. Let not loyalty and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge God, and God will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And our next text is from Isaiah chapter 55, and I'll be reading 6 through 9. Seek the Lord while God may be found. Call upon God while God is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have mercy on him. And to our God, for God will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
There is a Dilbert cartoon, you know, Dilbert cartoon. Anyway, Dilbert cartoon. For those of you who know, I'm not going to go into what is the Dilbert cartoon. I'll just tell you about it. There's a Dilbert cartoon that goes like this. Dilbert is interviewing someone. It's like boring corporate life. That's the story of the Dilbert cartoon. That's what the theme is. So Dilbert is interviewing someone, and Dilbert says, wow, he's looking at a resume. Wow, you've got 3 master's degrees and a PhD. And the candidate says, yes, it's all very impressive, but I actually have no common sense. And Dilbert says, that's not something you typically say at an interview. And the candidate says, I don't see why not. I was looking at all these memes this week about common sense. Common sense should be a superpower because hardly anyone has it, kind of things, you know? Albert Einstein says, common sense is the collection of prejudices required by age 18. Interesting, right? I found another that says, common sense is seeing things as they are and doing things as they ought to be. So says one person's common sense, right? You see, the thing about common sense is that none of us have all of it, right? But each of us have some of it, right? Some maybe have more than others. There's another one. Common sense isn't a gift. It means that you have to live with everyone else. And common sense only gets us so far, right? Because once we reach the end of what might be common sense, we go to things that aren't common, right? We need information or education. And then each of us in this room have attained different information, right? Formally and informally, right? In our room, because I get the privilege of knowing all of you a little bit more, right? We have engineers and lawyers. There's doctors and chaplains, nurses and administrators. There are realtors and teachers, business consultants and business administrators. There are social workers and scientists. That's a quick sweep of our area, right? Missing 50% of you probably. I could be here all day, though, if we tried to talk about the informal training that we all have in this room, right? So if I was just to ask, like, what are the books you're reading this summer, right? Then I would come up with, like, all kinds of things that we're all learning. Or if you're not a book person, right, if I ask, like, what are the documentaries that you're watching, right? Or what are the shows that are making you look things up on the internet? And all of a sudden, you know, we have a tremendous amount of knowledge in this room alone, right? Because we live in an age of massive amounts of information, and we're taking it in a rapid pace, and it's all wonderful and it's all exhausting. The information age, and yet every single one of us, regardless of our formal training and informal training, the books we are reading or the books we have read, every single one of us at some point in our life has said, I don't know what I was thinking. Right? That our common sense, our formal training, and our informal training all fails us at some point, many times in our lives. We've all done something or said something that revealed that whatever knowledge, whatever understanding we had simply wasn't enough. If we're honest, there are times in our lives where our understanding fails us. Some of us really don't like to admit that. Some of us are okay admitting it. We don't know everything. We come up with false conclusions sometimes. Sometimes we trust our gut, and our gut actually fails us. The Proverbs text today is incredibly well known. I call it a 99-cent thing in the Bible. If you don't know that from me, it essentially means if there's verses in the Bible that have been cross-stitched on a pillow, those are 99-cent things, right? So many of you have seen the words, trust in the Lord with all your heart, on a pillow, or a plaque, or a pencil, or an eraser. I don't know, but they're everywhere. Magnets that say, on your refrigerator, trust in the Lord with all your heart. What about the second part, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Why? What's wrong with my understanding? What's wrong with your understanding, right? Well, the thing is that the next passage that goes with it today is from Isaiah, and he says that our thoughts are not God's thoughts. Our ways are not God's ways. To which I want to say, never? My thoughts are never God's thoughts? My ways are never God's ways? My understanding and your understanding are not God's understanding. It might be like one dot of understanding that we get the same. We don't have God's understanding of things. As much as I have said I don't know what I was thinking at times, which I'm sure you have too, I have also experienced a lot of moments and even seasons of my life where I feel like I was right in the right place, doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. That my understanding did seem to jive with what should be done, right? So then how does that work? If we're to lean not on our own understanding, and if our thoughts are not God's thoughts, then how do we do this thing called life? How do we figure things out, right? And so I looked to two other scholars and pastors and what they were saying about these texts. One is Bruce Eckerly, who's from Massachusetts, and I follow his blog regularly. He's a professor and a pastor, and he says, our love is a shadow of God's love. A shadow. We're limited, in other words. God's love reaches to everyone and everything. God's ways, God's actions heal all that is broken. The love that I have it, but it's a shadow compared to the love that God has. My ways are not God's ways. God's love is grander than our love. So we can't lean on our own understanding because we don't have God's love the way that God's love is. So why else should we not lean on our own understanding? Why else would God's ways and God's thoughts not be ours? The next person I turned to was Patricia Toll. She's a professor emeritus at Luther Seminary, and she reminds us of this passage, and this is when, I'll go back a little bit to the Isaiah passage. Isaiah's passage is speaking to a group of people who have lived in Persia their whole life. They're exiles, right? So go back, the Exodus and the exile are really important stories to understand the Bible. I'll say it again, because if you haven't, the Exodus and the exile, you can't understand the Bible if you don't know those two stories. And that's okay if you're going, oh my gosh, I don't know those two stories. We're going to talk about one of them right now, right? So the exile. So the Jews were, the Israelites were exiled to Persia, first to Babylon, and then first to Syria, then to Babylon. So these people have lived there for a long time. The people that the text is talking to actually were born there. Like, this is their home. They don't know Jerusalem from anything. Their parents do, and their grandparents do, and their parents and their grandparents can't wait to go back. Some of them died, right? And so now they're being asked to go back to Jerusalem and make it your home. Pack up your Persian rugs and lay them out in Jerusalem, right? And so if we put ourselves in their story, if we try to imagine, right? They're being asked to pack up their family and their belongings and everything that they've Persia. But they probably feel like Persians, right? Persia was their home, and now they're asked to come home to a foreign land with probably even foreign food, foreign language, foreign landscape. It's a really hard thing to do. They know that as much as their parents and grandparents have told them how great it is in Jerusalem, they know that Jerusalem will never be what their parents and their grandparents had, because they're the ones moving back there. It's going to be their new place in Jerusalem. You can't turn back time. The story of return from the exile, and this is why it's so important to understand the scriptures. The story of the return, this exile and return story, it's become a metaphor for the spiritual journey to going back to God, knowing that we'll never go back to whatever it was, but we're still asked to return to the home place, which is God. So Jerusalem becomes like a symbol for God. It exhorts us to leave what we know and come home to God. It's a passage that dares us to believe in a world that is not what we see, but instead a world that God sees. So we can't lean on our own understanding because we don't have God's love. And we cannot lean on our own understanding because we often lack the courage to do what God asks us to do. Our understanding needs more love and more courage. God's ways and God's thoughts have more love and more courage. Love and courage. Love and courage. The situations around us in our time also reveal how our thoughts and our ways are not God's ways. Even the things that you mentioned in our prayers this morning, right? One of the reasons why we pray for things is because we don't understand them. Because we want God to help us understand, or help us know what to do, because we don't know what to do, right? Our understanding, we don't understand. So just this week, I'll highlight a couple of them, but I've been helping Mary Ann's friend Deb. We've prayed for her for a long time. She had a heart condition for years and years. And this week I helped her transition to death, right, with the help of Peter, because my understanding was even less than what I needed for the day. And when I went there, she had a visitor, and the visitor was doing what a lot of us do when we face death, right? The visitor was telling her, hang in there, you can do it, we're all depending on you. So here's a woman who's been unable to breathe on her own for 6 weeks. And so I listened as lovingly as I could to this visitor until I had to correct her. And Debbie was trying to be peacemaker. Oh, you guys are agreeing. And I said, oh, no, I don't agree with her at all. I go, she's allowed to think whatever she wants, but I don't agree with her. What I agree is that you have to let go. That's what you're doing right now, is letting go. This woman needed more love and more courage. And I don't mean that as a judgment. It's really hard when we're facing death. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. And so, dear God, help us not to lean on our own understanding. As we prayed for Gabby's dad died this last week. Gabby said that the last day with her dad was the hardest thing she'd ever seen, because he also wouldn't let go. He resisted and resisted and resisted death. We don't have God's thoughts. We resist God's ways. Dear God, help us not to lean on our own understanding. Instead, give us love and courage. It's a handful of folks in our congregation who are moving to different places and taking different jobs, and some discerning what to do. And those are exciting things, but man, they need love and courage to do that, right? Change is a constant, right? And as we live in a community life, I don't know if you've noticed this, but man, choosing church life, we experience that many more deaths, that many more births, that many more marriages, we just experience life on an exponential scale. We also experience change on an exponential scale, right? Because change is constant. Change seems to happen all the time. And we have a tendency, though, to want to cling to what we know. We don't want it to change. We don't want what we know, what we have known, to go away. And so we need love and courage to do that. Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. Our ways are not God's ways. So, dear God, help us not to lean on our own understanding. Help us to trust you. We prayed for the 4 Marines that were killed this week, right? on U.S. soil by a young man that has no ties to religious extremism. In fact, they can't figure out why, because he has a really small internet footprint, which I didn't even know anyone had a small internet footprint anymore. We don't know. We don't understand. God does. Our thoughts are not God's. Our ways are not God's. So, dear God, help us to understand, or help us not to lean on our own understanding. We prayed for Iran and our government officials that have come to this historic agreement that shows signs of peace, but is incredibly scary and new. And like I said, I imagine that none of us are completely at ease. And so, dear God, help us not to lean on our own understanding. Instead, give us your love and your courage. Help us to trust you. And so I would ask you today, what is it in your life that you are lacking wisdom for? Where are you lacking understanding? If you are honest, instead of thinking that you know all. If we are honest in realizing that we don't know everything, and that we sometimes say, I don't know what I was thinking. What is the thing? What's going on in your life that you need wisdom for? And so take out your origami paper, and I would ask you to write a prayer for that. Where are you perhaps leaning too much on your own understanding? Maybe that's the direction you want to think of in your prayer. Where do you need God's thoughts because your thoughts have come to an end? And write a prayer for that on your paper as we spend time in reflection. And if you'd like to try to make it into a butterfly, you can. If not, you can put it in the offering plate, or you can bring it to fellowship time, and we will make them together. And so let's take some time thinking of where we need wisdom, where we need God's love and courage in our lives.
you.